Yes, indeed. The town did unload its a surplus 1989 Ford fire truck, the chassis and all the stuff that goes with it. They had 4 bids in total.
Wow.
And they ended up sending it off into the hands of a fellow by the name of William Bossman for $7,100. So, good deal struck right there. More money in the town coffers.
So the buyer presented as an individual, not as a fire department somewhere.
Yeah, part of the problem, of course, with a 1989 pickup truck is it's almost impossible, if not impossible, to get a vehicle of that vintage insured as a firefighting vehicle.
Well, I can tell you from my own experience that they have a fixed lifespan attached to fire trucks of all kinds. And
Indeed.
It's partly about insurance, but it's also partly about the insurance of being sued, if you will, the liability question, if you've got an aged fire truck. The shame of it is, quite frankly, that the fire trucks are probably the best kept vehicles on the road. They don't drive as much as you would a car or a delivery truck and things like that. And in between usages, they're washed and cleaned and sharpened up and waxed and polished. And if there's the hint of anything wrong, they fix it. So you could probably safely buy a used fire truck, a very old used fire truck, and find you've got yourself a really good vehicle on your hands.
I can't speak of with any authority on the matter, and your logic sounds absolutely fine. It does seem, however, that the fire trucks that we do still have in service at our department, and I'm sure in other departments have the same challenge, that following their regular inspections, and they are inspected far more than our own, most vehicles on the road, there always seems to be things that do pop up. And, of course, these things do get a bit of rough service. I mean, the pumpers are hauling around an awful lot of weight and into some pretty interesting neighborhoods. So.
Well, I'm hauling a lot of weight around, too, but I'm still here.
Well, I'm surprised that the forecast for last night's meeting was light because quite a bit of things were covered last night, I have to say. Now, the most... I don't want to say this is the most important thing, but I certainly think there will be a few folks out there, maybe members of the Monarchist League, who would like to know that the King Charles III portrait has now been hung in council chambers. The Queen's portrait, by the way, does not go off into a closet. She's still on the wall. So, for anyone interested, that's been handled.
So that we have the town hall is now the Royal Art Gallery. Is that what you're saying?
Well, it has been for many years, hasn't it? Just
True.
With a single portrait. Yeah. So that's been covered. But in general, there was a lot of not discussion last night, but a lot of information. Of course, the town departments are always presented at a committee of the whole meeting. Town Public Works, it's their high season, snow clearing and all the equipment maintenance that has to happen. They even did a bit of pothole patching on Main Street. The Capitol Theatre, new furnace was installed last month, but it's having a few hiccups, and they're getting all that worked out so that our Friday night jam can proceed as planned. Fire department, since we talked about the fire truck we sold, the fire department had a busy 2025 January, 16 calls, only 2 of those in the town limits. A lot of activity outside of the community, including car accidents and medical calls. The Oxford Volunteer Fire Department also had its annual banquet last month, and they recognized a number of members for their long service as firefighters. Now, of course, the big thing, we're coming up on springtime budget deliberations, and that's the time when everybody tries to figure out how much money we have spent, how much we have, and what we can possibly do going forward. So Finance Manager Ruth Ann Brookins reported the town's books are pretty much on target, a few increases here and there, but for the most part, things are where they should be for this time of year, at about 3/4 of the way through the planned budget expenditures. There was one unexpected jump in let's say, the bills that came into the mailbox. Oxford's annual payout to the school system took a $36,000 increase over the last year. And they're looking at forecasting another $24,000 increase in the upcoming budget. So that's about a $60,000 bill increase for the school system.
Now, let me just ask you this question. I know that this is something that is posed by the province to the town, and it's not negotiable. You say it was a bit of a surprise. What caused such a jump? Is there no forewarning at all?
Well, I think you could look at this as what's the phrase that I'm looking at? The town of Oxford being a victim of its own success on that point, because the bill paid to the school system is calculated from the value of the municipality's housing stock. And of course, Oxford over the last 4 years particularly has had some stupendous growth in its new houses, housing sales, and that sort of thing. So with the additional sales and the additional value, everybody is, the tax bills were out in January to everyone, showing them the value of your properties, capped or not. The municipal housing stock value has increased significantly, and that is why the school bill goes up as well.
Thank you for that info.
Yeah. So those are the big things that happened last night. It's going to be an issue going forward as Oxford continues to have really wonderful, housing developments in this community. Lots more planned, some near term and some not so near term. But Oxford is a growing community. We'd love to have a new census come along so we could figure out just how many people actually live here.
Well, it's not that big. Just go around the streets and count them.
Yeah, I'll stand on the corner, Bill. You can bring the coffee by and I'll get through the day.
Yeah.
Oh, dear. But those are the big things. And I should mention, we talk a lot, and we have talked a lot over the years, about the challenges facing a small town with the capital budgets, the infrastructure work that has to be done. Oxford last year had a rather large project with the Foundry Street water main replacement, a section of town that really hadn't seen any attention in well over 30 years. So they had a large budget of about just over $2 million. The final price for the project covering water main replacements on Foundry Street and River Avenue came in around $1.67 million. The town of Oxford only had to cough up $322,000 to get that work done, 19% of the project. And according to the finance minister, Ruth Ann Brookins, that's because they did a wonderful job. She didn't use the word wonderful. She wasn't very, self-promoting on this, very, very humble. But they did a wonderful job of stacking the provincial and federal funding and grants so that they could pay that bill and not have a really huge hit to Oxford's own budget.
Now, having said that about the new water system, of course, we had an alert from the Chief Administrative Officer last week about a water break in that area. And, of course, immediately I thought about, wait a minute now, they just put a brand new system in there and the water breaks are happening already? Well, it turned out, of course, it wasn't the new, it was the old, but very, very nearby. Did that raise any consternation with the folks the way it did with me?
Yes, I think we were all quite interested when we found out the initial alert because it seemed to have happened on the new line. But this is a very old story with the town of Oxford and its aged infrastructure, particularly the main street and its side street connections. Whenever there was a water break and the town workers replaced part of those pipes, they would replace the part that sprung the leak, turn the water back on, and, well, look, the old pipe that they had to connect to started crumbling at the point of connection. So that's an ongoing trouble that the town is looking at with their asset management survey. And as they move forward now, the town has a very significant challenge in the coming years in terms of funding the replacement of water mains throughout the rest of town.
Now, I'm going to ask you a question that probably should be asked of the mayor, but I'm afraid to. And that is, the infrastructure has been crumbling for a very long time. It's not the fault of the current council, of course. And for a while there, they had no resources. They had not allowed the reserves to build up. And we've heard him and you talk several times about those 50-cent dollars. You can get the province to share with you 50-50, so you get their 50 cents and your 50 cents makes the dollar. But having done that new system, how's the reserve? Because they know full well there's a whole lot more that needs to be done. Are we going to have to see the waiting for decades or years in order to move on to the next big problem?
Everything we've heard from the finance manager and the mayor has been that the town has been very prudent in stocking away cash into the reserves. It's a complicated picture that a lot of people don't take the time to understand. It is a difficult thing to track, particularly when you're not just looking at the money you're able to toss into the reserves every year. You're also looking at when certain bills have been paid off, when your debentures come due, when things are no longer on the books as having to be paid every year. It's a rotating process with previous debts being retired. So getting a really good handle on when all this money is going to be available or can be available for future projects, it's a continually moving target and sometimes a guessing game. And as I mentioned, last evening we found out that rather than 50-cent dollars in terms of the Foundry Street project, it was 19-cent dollars with some creative funding stacking from the feds and from the province.
And, of course, we know, the federal government has been a little more generous in recent months, maybe even a couple of years, but that may or may not continue depending on the results of a pending spring election.
Always elections will have an effect. But let's give credit where it's due to the provincial government did step up since the pandemic with a lot of extra cash for municipalities to address things that they needed to deal with. And on the Foundry Street project, Brookins took pains to mention that the province had coughed up 87% of that bill. The federal share was 13%. So that was a pretty hefty investment from the province. And with the new service agreement that now recognizes the toll on provincial or on municipal budgets of the provincial highways that pass through a town, and
Main
Oxford,
Street,
of course, has three of those.
Main Street
Yep.
in particular.
Main Street, Water Street, Pugwash Road, Birchwood Road. All of those roads are part of the provincial system and have adjusted. They've come into a new adjustment of how the province now will fund infrastructure projects dealing with those routes.
To the benefit of the town and all other municipalities.
Indeed.
Well, sir, you've got about a minute and a half left. I always like to give you a little time for yourself. And when I say yourself, I'm talking about Hello Oxford. You are the editor of said publication. I know you keep saying it's in its infancy, but it's been around for a little while now, gathering some steam. You are very, very good at presenting the historical perspective. How about the growth?
Well, there are a few things in the works. We have some new contributors coming aboard very soon. You'll see some new articles. I'll tend to focus more on the historical material because it's where my passion lies. Easier stories to tell, things that have already happened. Understanding current events, that's a bit of a challenge sometimes. But before I go off, well, I won't have time to go off on that particular project, although I encourage everyone to read Hello Oxford. I should mention that we have one other development locally that's been wonderful. In the last couple of days, we've actually seen some superstructure going up with the new Oxford Community Centre building.
Oh, physical proof.
Physical proof. The metal skeleton has begun, so we may indeed see doors open by the end of this year.
And then we'll put in a swimming pool and a bowling alley and...
Oh, dear. Well, let's hold off and see how things develop, Bill.
Good idea.